Good evening, everybody, and a really warm welcome to our awards ceremony tonight. It's a pleasure to have you all here, ladies, gentlemen, yen entrants, sponsors, and those interested in what we're about to hear tonight. Tonight's our 8th annual cereal and the 4th annual Oilseed Awards for the Yield Enhancement Network, and it's absolutely fantastic to have you all with us in a slightly different virtual way of working. Tonight is a celebration of excellence. Excellence in crop production, in the yields that we're about to hear, in those achievements for what we're about to hear tonight. Tonight is about a celebration of excellence in the effectiveness of knowledge exchange between our farmers and our scientists that are involved in the Yen Awards. In industry collaboration from the whole range of partners that are involved in the Yen network. A celebration of excellence, not only in friendly competition, but also sharing the results and the learnings, the big part of what the Yen network is all about. Tonight is a celebration of excellence, not only in measuring the detail, as we all know, through the season, taking your tissue samples, doing those weighbridge checks at harvest, but also the unknown, and following up on those unknowns, those questions that you think, why did that happen like that? Why did I get that result? What might have been making that difference on farm? That attention to detail and translating that, working with our researchers to put that into practice, to find out new research and findings that we can use on farm. And finally, tonight is a celebration of excellence, both in urgency and the long term. The urgency for the solutions we might need to find in the next few years with challenges ahead and changes in our agronomic practice or nutrition, but also the long term, looking at some of those key elements of what makes yield potential, how we improve biomass, and getting to a stage when we can improve yields and therefore profitability and sustainability of our farms and businesses. So welcome to our Yen Awards for 2020, and we look forward to sharing with you this celebration of excellence tonight. Next slide, Roger, please. So my name is Teresa Meadows, and it's my privilege to be chair tonight alongside Tom Allen Stevens as we take you through the awards in the evening. I'm Knowledge Exchange Manager for AHDB covering East Anglia, and it's been brilliant to work alongside Yen for the last few years, both with our farmers and entrants and as a sponsor as well. I know certainly from taking part in Yen, I've had farmers that have changed their drill off the back of it, changed their agronomic practice, looked in much more detail at their crops, but most of all really enjoyed that being part of a network and the discussions and the conversations that that's brought. So if we go on to the housekeeping, Roger, we've got a few things just to share before we begin. We can't see you or hear you tonight, sadly, but you definitely can stay involved and take part. On the panel on the side of your screen, there's an opportunity to write questions in the question box, and we can take those as we go through, whether that's technical or whether that's questions for our panelists and our speakers as we go through the night. We have registered this evening for basis and Rosso points. There's one basis and one Rosso point available. If you'd like to claim those basis and Rosso points, please put your name, your postcode and your membership number into that question box, and we'll make sure that you're registered. Tonight's session is being recorded, and that will be available on the YouTube channel and on the Yen website after tonight, and so you can watch it back and watch those tips we might hear from our finalists and panelists and share that wider as well. But we don't want the conversation to end tonight. We want you to share where you are, how you're watching this, tagging in at @Yen, and the hashtag for tonight is Yen Awards. And we're also around on the Crop Tech show, Daniel and Christina, as part of the Yen Hub and the ADAS stand, if you want to ask any more questions tomorrow. So it's a delight to share with you, Roger, the next slide, that we've had 183 different serial Yen entrants for 2020, alongside 38 oilseed Yen entries. Those have come from a variety of places across the UK, and also from Ireland, the Shetland Isles, Scandinavia, Estonia, the Netherlands. and it's brilliant to have you here tonight. I know we've got many international people joining us as well from Australia and Canada, so welcome. You're all welcome. So on to the agenda for tonight. Tonight's agenda is open to everybody to attend, and we hope that those of you that this might be a first flavour of Yen really pick up a feel of what a lot of us have been involved with and had the privilege to take part in for a number of years. So I'm shortly going to hand over to Roger Sylvester-Bradley, and Roger's going to give us a little introduction to Yen and then look back at Harvest 2019 and Harvest 2020 and Autumn 2019. And look at how the season worked for that. We're then going to hand over to Tom Allen Stevens, and Tom is going to take us through the award winners and announce those, and introduce the award winners that were joining us tonight through a series of video introductions, and then chair the panel session there as well. We're then going to hear a final summary and a roundup from Daniel Kindred, and Daniel's going to take us through some of the programme highlights and things you can get involved with, and then we'll wrap up today by 8:30. There are some other serial technical webinars that are happening in the next couple of weeks, and I'll explain a bit more about those as we come to the end. So Roger, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through an introduction to the Yen.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and hello to everyone, wherever you are, Yen entrants, Yen participants, Yen sponsors, and people interested in the Yen from wherever you are in the world. It's my job to introduce you to the Yen, and I recognize that some of you have not heard about the Yen before, so I'm going to try and do my best to explain that. And then I'm going to talk, because the Yen has now existed for 8 years. This is our 8th annual conference and award session. So we're able to talk about the things we're learning as a result of the Yen activities. And then I want to, before we get to the award session, introduce you to the very challenging season that was that led up to our harvest in 2020. So 3 parts of my talk. So I'm going to turn my video off now, and so that you can concentrate on my slides.
And Roger, we just need you to share your slides again, please. They've disappeared. Thank you.
How do I do that? So am I going to be invited to show my slides again?
Why don't you start talking, Roger, and then hopefully that will come through from Jane for you.
Okay. Well, I'm going to begin by talking about the challenge of farming. And for me, now I think we've got the slides back, yes. So I will turn myself off and show you my first slide, I hope. There we are. So farming is, and has for millennia, been an art. It's there are multiple, in fact, we've calculated the quantity is something like a quadrillion options in farming. The job is to convert solar energy into edible energy. And the more productive that process is, the better the farm is, the more viable the farm is, and the more satisfactory it is for civilization, because fewer of us will need to farm, and therefore more of us can do all the other things that are exciting about being a human being. And at the same time, it's inevitable that there will be environmental consequences of farming. High yields dilute those impacts of farming. So, and the more we can produce from each hectare, the less hectares we need to farm. So yield, we have no apology for selecting yield as the first target of this collaborative activity. So the wonderful environment we have in the UK allows us to grow a whole combination of cereal crops, oilseed crops and pulse crops. We're dealing with cereals and oilseeds in this webinar, and we have other yens that deal with the other crops. And we're particularly pleased that it's a collaborative exercise between people who supply all the essentials to grow good crops, the seeds, the fertilizers, the crop protection products, and the people who try and help the farmers with the decision making about all those multiple options that they have. But the direction that a farmer can take could be any of many directions, but productivity at the end of the day dictates their success. So what we've done is to create this collaborative network, this yield enhancement network, which is addressing the productivity, involving all these sponsors. And now what I want to try and do with this slide is to show you the process that we go through in the yield enhancement network. It's the conventional research process, and we've realized that although we're addressing yield, the process is actually applicable to any challenge to farming, as long as there's some scientific understanding of that. So this is a collaboration between the farmers and the farm staff, but also the advisors and the laboratories that support them, the manufacturers, suppliers, distributors, and the applied research community. And I'm going to begin showing the cycle, the research cycle that we have established that involves us all. So first of all, the wonderful group of scientists that I work with are all totally, they are experienced scientists in terms of doing small plot experimentation. But what we've realized in the setting up of the yen is that what we learn from our small plots, there is a huge gap in confidence and certainty in applying what we find on small plots because of the huge variability across fields. So we could get any of many answers by experimenting at different positions, even within one field. So we now have upscaled ourselves to work at farm level and to work and to try and apply our understanding. And we've expressed our understanding of crop growth in these growth guides that are available from the AHDB website. And those crop guides contain all the explanatory measurements that you need in order to understand yield, because this is not just a yield competition, it's about understanding. So we work with the farmers with protocols for them to take measurements and for us to help them to take measurements that will explain their yields. So it's a competition, but it's also very much a collaborative between farmers and advisors, so they can compare their measurements and see why they're getting what they're getting. And the main thing that the farmers value out of the yield enhancement network at the moment are these reports. We've just been distributing these reports to hundreds of farmers across the UK and the other entrants in the competition across Europe. And these are no mean report. They're 24 pages and they contain more than 60 explanatory measurements. So the farmers, it's not a quick read. The farmers pore over these reports over several days or several weeks, and they keep telling us they come back to them to try and understand how to work out what to do better, because it's all about trying to understand in order to come up with ideas. And what we like to do is to collect together and to debate the results from that we're getting and find people with common ideas about what they might do better, because that gives us the confidence that we've got a good idea and that it might be viable. But then when we've got those ideas, and sometimes the sponsors are involved in this, they may be wanting to supply a particular new product that is a nutrient or a biostimulant or a protection product, and what they help us to do is to actually test those ideas. So we've worked out ways of doing robust experiments. It's very difficult to do experiments at field scale because of this huge variability within fields. 3 to 4 tons variation is not uncommon in UK fields, so we need robust statistical methods of analysing yield maps from precision combine harvesters in order to tell the small differences that very often these products are having. But that can be a collaborative exercise between these groups of farmers and involving a sponsor that has a particular product. And the protocols for doing these experiments are actually available free from the ADAS website. So that completes the circle. So the findings from these experiments can then feed back into our science and into our understanding of yields and where to go next. So that's I hope that as quickly as I can explains how the yen, the sort of philosophy of the yen and how we're working. So now let's just move on to what we've learned from the yen in, well, the 8 years since we started working on winter wheat. Our understanding before we began is probably best summarized in this conference proceedings. We held a conference in 2004. The proceedings were published in a 600-page book in 2005. And in there, we worked out what the theoretical potential was for the productivity of land in the UK, of arable land in the UK. And we were astonished how large the potential yields were compared with what people were reporting to us. But we didn't really have any good understanding of what was happening at the farm scale, at the field scale. It all came from small plots. So what we've done in the yen is to set up this network, and the average yields in the yen have been, over the 8 years, about 11 tons per hectare. But that's only 57% of the potentials, the theoretical potentials, which is worked out from the solar energy that's available to our hectares and the water that's available to our hectares. Those are the two things that really drive yield potential in the UK. And so we can see that there's a lot more to go at, which gives us a lot of encouragement. But then we've got crops like this. This is what a high yielding crop looks like. This is a crop that yielded 16.5 tons in 2015, with the photograph taken on the 28th of July. So very much at the end, towards the end of the grain filling period, there are still 4 green leaves on each stem in this crop. It's still photosynthesizing actively right until the end of July. And what we found in the results, having collected nearly 1,000 yields in the yield enhancement network so far, is that instead of the general idea that we got from the Green Revolution was that the harvest index was important. In fact, it's not. The harvest index is reasonably stable compared with the biomass of the crop. What we need to do to grow a big crop like this is to generate a lot of biomass. So in other words, large yields come from large crops. It sounds obvious, but it wasn't what we understood before we started. So those large crops need to have a lot of shoots. That's how you get high biomass, with many heads to store all the assimilate during the grain filling period. So you need probably over 25,000 grains per square meter in order to have a yield that's up in the order of 15 tons per hectare. Most varieties, there's a lot of focus on varieties amongst growers in the UK and growers around the world, I'm sure. But and certainly the genetics community has been very successful in moving yield potentials up. But actually, amongst the varieties that are currently available commercially in the UK, many of those are capable of producing 15 tons per hectare. We don't find a big influence between those varieties in our database. What we do find is that some of the low yields appear to be associated with deficiencies in some of the macronutrients. We're not particularly good at knowing the nutritional status of our crops, and this has really been a discovery that the yen has made, and we've now introduced, as Daniel will talk about later, the yen nutrition, which is a new version of the yen that just focuses on nutrition. But the real sort of take home from the database is this factor that this finding that the farm-to-farm variation is the biggest part. I mean, of course, there's a lot of seasonal variation, which we can do nothing about, but taking that out of the equation, most of the rest, half of the rest of the variation is between farms. So some farms are consistently doing better than other farms, and it isn't at the moment particularly clear why that is, but it does mean that if we can compare farms, then we'll start to learn how to do better. So turning to oilseed rape, really the story is very similar. We worked out that the potential of oilseed rape is way ahead of even the yields that we're getting in the yield enhancement network of 4.8 on average. This is what a very high yielding crop of oilseed rape looks like. Many, many pods and something of the order of 100,000 seeds per square meter. So a lot of storage capacity. That's really what's necessary in oilseed rape, because it's a sink, what we call as physiologists, a sink limited crop. So what we're looking for is not necessarily high biomass per hectare, but big plants that come through to the flowering stage and allow good light interception, good light penetration of the canopy, so that the large proportion of the flowers set into pods, and those pods form a lot of seeds, so that we get high seed number per square meter. And then ideally the green tissue, as in this crop that you can see on the 30th of June this year, the green tissue would last well through grain filling, so that those seeds fill adequately. So high yields are not, again, associated particularly with variety choice. There's a tendency for yields to be higher towards the north in oilseed rape, whereas in fact our potential calculations say they should be higher towards the south. So that's a bit of a puzzle. Higher yields associated with high soil P, soil Mg, and certainly that's supported by the grain analysis, the seed analysis that we do. And there is an association generally in the yens. We've not found an association a strong association between inputs and yield. But this is one of the exceptions, that fungicide use on oilseed rape does seem to be important. Again, in oilseed rape, there's this big farm-to-farm effect, the biggest part of the controllable variation. So I hope that's the second part of my talk. I hope that's explained what we've learned, some of what we've learned in the yen. Of course, the yen members will have heard a lot more than that, and they'll get a lot more than that out of their reports. But now I want to move on to just quickly review the growing season that led to this harvest. And my word, it wasn't half a challenging season. Probably the best statistics to describe it are these, to show that the change in area compared to the 5-year average, the change in area of autumn cereals was enormous. A third less barley, a quarter less winter wheat, a third less winter oilseed rape, an increase in field beans because that can be planted more flexibly, and then big increases in spring plantings, in spring sowings. So almost doubling of spring barley, which will be the biggest acreage of these crops here. So a big transition. So there weren't so many autumn established crops for growers to select to enter into our competitions, and we started a competition for spring sown crops, which you'll hear the winners talking about later. So just to show you the weather that we've been through, I'm using these Met Office anomaly maps. So these are the differences from the 30-year long-term average. So this is our very wet autumn, and you can see the wetness was particularly associated with the East Midlands and South Yorkshire. The wetness carried on through the winter, and extremely wet February with some huge storms dumping lots of rain on the land, on a very wet land. Only the northeast of Scotland seemed to escape this, but then suddenly it turned dry, and again the extreme effects are up the east side of the country, and particularly in East Midlands and up the east coast, the northeast coast of England. And then, unfortunately, the summer was really rather dull. And in fact, when we work out the yield potentials, which I'm now going to come to, the yield potentials were down a bit because of this dullness. In fact, our calculations of theoretical yield potential are based on the assumption that you can drain your land and you can get, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of land you can't drain, but and that you couldn't get rid of the water quickly enough, but we assume that you're able to establish crops in the autumn. We assume that they can intercept 60% of the solar radiation right through the season. So it's mainly this low incident radiation in the summer that's caused our reduction in our estimates of yield potential. So these are the yield potentials. Generally what we see, I'll go with the cereals first. So generally what we see is higher potentials on the west and in the south, and lower potentials actually where we grow most of the crops on the east. But nevertheless, I mean, look at the numbers. The potentials are all generally much bigger than the crops we're growing. So we're seeing potentials. I mean, on average this year, it was of the order of 18 tons per hectare for the autumn's planted crops. Spring planted crops a bit less. Oilseeds, obviously we're talking about smaller numbers, but again, the average potential for oilseeds this year was of the order of 11 tons per hectare, which is similar to what it's been over recent years. So this is how the crops performed as quickly as I can summarize them. So this is the average from the winter wheat crops entered into the yen this year. So you can see that the solar radiation on an annual basis was down. It was about 33 terajoules per hectare instead of 35 terajoules per hectare. The rainfall was up a lot by about 13%, but the summer rainfall, or the spring and summer rainfall, April to July, was down a lot, and that will have affected our estimate of the yield potential of the spring crops. The yield potential of the winter crops was down by about 6%. And then most of the yield components were all down. So we've got the grain number is down by more than 10%, and the 1,000 grain went up a little to compensate. Similarly, the crop biomass is down by about more than 10%, but the harvest index was up a little bit to compensate. That's two different ways of expressing the same thing. So the yields in the yen were actually not down as much as the national yields. So the yen yields were down by about 7%, and the national yields were down by about 13%. But that's because yen entrants will have selected their best crops. Quality criteria were a little bit better this year, and of course the salvation of this year has been in the prices. So oilseed rape, just to quickly summarize that, we've got the same weather information at the top. The yield potential is only down a little bit for oilseed rape. Seed numbers were reasonably good and better than the long-term average, but 1,000 seed weight, basically those increase in seed numbers didn't fill so well, and the total biomass of the crops was down quite a lot, whereas the harvest index was up. So there's a slight difference between the wheat and the rape, but it actually surprises me that the two such different crops actually show similar responses to this season. So particularly the biomass being down and the harvest index being up. So to summarize, I hope I haven't taken too long, that the yens are they're very much a collaborative, cooperative exercise, bringing together the farmers, the advisors, the suppliers, the scientists to try and build an understanding of, well, first of all, what exactly we are producing in terms of yield, field by field, and then explaining that and working out how to do better. That it's the 24-page reports with the 60 explanatory metrics that really are the foundation for our knowledge about our crops. And in producing these, as I've mentioned, we've got about 1,000 yields now with this explanatory data behind it, so we can start analysing that to see what the important factors are. And we've now, starting with cereals, we've got a subset of the cereals with specifically looking at barley with a separate yen. We've got a separate yen for oilseeds, peas, beans, potatoes, grass, and we've got yen starting overseas. And I know I've got people listening to me from Canada, and so which is excellent. So the main lessons so far are that big yields come from big crops, and so we have to think about this biomass. And in fact, it's the geneticists that have actually created the capacity of these crops to produce this biomass. So it's a different story to the green revolution that we are all sort of familiar with hearing about in the last century. What we're having to do in this century is to produce more biomass in order to have more to eat, basically. So, and it's not particularly to do with the inputs we spend, it's to do with intercepting the radiation and capturing the soil moisture to allow those photosynthetic canopies to persist. And the farm factor is very important. So this farm-to-farm learning is very much at the heart of the yield enhancement network. So it's a difficult season. Yield potential is only slightly reduced. The yields of the yen crops only slightly reduced, but they were quite different in character in that they had less biomass and more harvest index. Their percent of potential was actually remarkably good in some of the really good crops that we're going to hear about in a few minutes. So Daniel Kindred will speak after the awards have been made about the future developments of the yen, but we're really very excited about what we seem to have created here. It seems to be the basis for something that we can build into the future. We now have a specific yen about nutrition. We're going to have one about carbon footprinting that Daniel will mention, and that we have a few new grants that we've just received, public grants, public money to help us develop the yens, and we have promising government policies that look as though they should support what we're learning how to do. So, and we have better grain prices, which will of course make the whole job a lot more attractive into the future. So thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone over time, Teresa. Well, I don't know whether is there time for questions.
I might ask you one, Roger. Thank you so much. That was a fascinating presentation and great to see those details. I don't know if you want to come back on and I can ask you in person. Really interesting and fascinating what this season has shown us and the challenges that we've seen and but the learnings that kind of continue through the years. So a question specifically about oilseed rape. There's quite a difference between the north and the south. Is that due to the longer temperatures and the longer duration of growth and yield formation that happens in the north? And or is that a large part down to flea beetle and some of the yields that we've seen, which has relieved the pressure in the north but made it a challenge in the south?
Yeah, I don't run the oilseed rape yen, so it's going to be an amateur reply you're going to get to this, Teresa. But I mean, in general, we've always seen that there is a tendency for higher yields. I remember there was a yield record that stood for a long time for wheat from Scotland, but the calculations we do show the potential is higher in the south and the west, and that's not what we see. So that either means that our science is wrong, or that there's something else, like the plant breeders don't actually breed for the southwest. So I don't know which of those it is, and these sorts of questions are exactly what, the yen is there to sort of really raise those questions and see, well, to feed into further research to actually really answer find the answers. But why oilseed rape was doing better in the north, the assumption is that it is cooler. and therefore crops last longer and therefore intercept more light.
And flea beetle is less of a problem to get it established and get it there, so you've got a crop to then be able to build on. So I know there's a piece of work that Sarah Kendall's been working on, looking at the last few years of rape and the lessons learned. I know she's sharing that with us next week, so yeah, we can go into that in more detail. Brilliant, thank you, Roger. There's some other questions that have come in, but I think we're going to pick that up in the panel session with the other speakers later, because there's some really interesting ones about nutrition and that farmer factor. So we'll pick those up in the panel discussion now. But I think the moment we're all been waiting for is here to join us. Thank you, Roger. And I'd like to then hand over to Tom Allen Stevens. So Tom is a farmer in Oxfordshire and also editor at the Crop Production magazine, and is going to take us through the announcements of the award winners and then our panel discussion. So without further ado, over to you, Tom. Tom, we've lost your audio again. It's not working. Jane, I wonder if you could try and do that. We had this earlier, so hopefully we can get Tom back. Otherwise, we're going to get good at lip reading. Tom, there you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's the thing of 2020. You're on mute. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Teresa, for that, and thank you very much, Roger, as well, for that fascinating insight into Yen. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing about Yen Zero later as well. That sounds brilliant. No, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and worthy Yen yielders. And may I say what an honour it is to be asked to announce the winners of this, the 8th Yen Awards, I believe. And to my mind, it really is a truly worthy initiative. I mean, importantly, what it does is focus our minds on the components of yield. I mean, for years, growers have been told that there's magical stuff that you can spray on your fields that will create a little bit more yield. Well, the guys at AHDB just threw all of that out of the window. They turned it on its head and pointing out that the crop already has fantastic yield potential, and it's just a question of preserving that from the moment that the seed goes in the ground to when you pop it in the harvester. And of course, the other aspect of this is the competition. And these are the Oscars of UK crop production, and should have all the glitz and glamour that go with that. And it's a shame we can't meet in person, and I, for one, really miss that. But we'll do our best with these virtual presentations. So the trophies and the certificates have already been posted, and I, for one, have already started the celebrations. So, anyway, so without further ado, we're going to move straight on to the main categories. And I'm going to turn my webcam off. So we've got 6 main categories. The 6 main categories, they are cereals, spring barley and oilseeds. And for each, there are awards for overall field yield and percentage of potential yield. So for all entries, the potential yield for the site is estimated, and yield is presented as a percentage of this potential yield. And this allows entrants to compete irrespective of the natural limitations of their potential. So we'll begin with cereals, where the majority the majority of the entries here are for winter wheat, but this category does include other cereals as well, including winter barley. Now, despite the challenges that we've had that brought during it in 2019, we saw some fantastic yielding crops, as Roger has already explained, and we'll start with the best field yields. So the bronze award for the best field yield goes to, congratulations, Peter Chapman in Aberdeenshire, sponsored by Hutchinson's with a yield of 14.8 tonnes a hectare. And the silver award in this category goes to, well done, Tim Lamyman in Lincolnshire with a grain yield of 15.4 tonnes a hectare. And the gold award in this category, the overall winner, congratulations, Tim Lamyman from Lincolnshire with a stonking yield of 15.6 tonnes a hectare. Moving straight on then. So we're now moving to best potential, best percentage of potential yield. And the bronze winner in this category is, congratulations, Ashley Jones in Cornwall, sponsored by AHDB with 92% of 13.9 tonnes a hectare potential yield. Silver award winner in this category, well done, Tim. Tim Lamyman, Lincolnshire again, 98% of 15.9 tonnes a hectare. And the overall winner in this category, well done, Ian Lamyman in Aberdeenshire, sponsored by Hutchinson's with a staggering 102% of 13.9 tonnes a hectare. And I understand from the guys at ADAS that to get over 100%, you know, really is really going something. So well done, Ian. That's brilliant. So moving on, there's also an award for best trial yield, and we also look at the best yield achieved in crop trials. And the winner this year is, well done, Ben Giles in Oxfordshire, sponsored by Bayer, who achieved a grain yield of 13.1 tonnes a hectare. And then in this category, there's also the best percentage of potential trial yield. And the winner in this category is, yes, that goes to Ben Giles again in Oxfordshire, with an 84% of 15.6 tonnes a hectare. Well done, Ben. And we'll take a quick look at the regional awards as well. So in Scotland, well done to Peter Chapman of Aberdeenshire, sponsored by Hutchinson's, 14.8 tonnes a hectare. In the north, we've got Thomas Todd of Northumberland, sponsored by Hutchinson's again, 14.6 tonnes a hectare. Then in the west, we've got Mark Doble and in Somerset, sponsored by BASF, of 13.9 tonnes a hectare. And then in the east, well done Richard Means of Cambridgeshire with 12.7 tonnes a hectare. Moving on in the East Midlands, well done Tim Lamyman with 15.6 tonnes a hectare. In the southeast, James Loder-Simmons in Kent with 12 tonnes a hectare. And then in outside the UK, the category outside the UK, apologies, that was, I've advanced the slide too much, for Asmus from Christiansen from Denmark, sponsored by Hutchinson's with 14 tonnes a hectare. So well done, all those winners. So moving on, the highest percentage of potential yield, and in Scotland, well done Ian Lamyman, and as we heard earlier, that's staggering 102% of 13.9 tonnes a hectare. His entry sponsored by Hutchinson's. Then there's Thomas Todd in Northumberland with 78% of 18.6 tonnes a hectare, again sponsored by Hutchinson's. In the west, Ashley Jones of Cornwall, sponsored by AHDB, 92% of 13.9 tonnes a hectare. And then in East Anglia, Richard Means in Cambridgeshire with 90% of 14 tonnes a hectare. Moving on to East Midlands. Oh, what a surprise, it's Tim again, with 98% of 15.9 tonnes a hectare. And there's James Loder-Simmons in Kent with 75% of 16.1 tonnes a hectare. In outside the UK, we've got Brian Salome of the Netherlands with 64% of 20.1 tonnes a hectare. And then Hendrik Visser in the Netherlands with 79% of 13.8 tonnes a hectare. So moving on to the Gold Award for Best Winter Barley Yield. And congratulations to Tim Lamyman in Lincolnshire. This one sponsored by Hutchinson's with a grain yield of 12.7 tonnes a hectare. And the best percentage of winter barley potential yield goes to, well done, David Bell in Fife, with a percentage of 84% of 14.1 tonnes a hectare. So moving on to the Spring Barley Awards. Now, due to the challenging autumn of 2019, Yen launched a spring cereal category, especially for this year. Notably, this was won by spring barley crops in all cases. So these awards cover both categories. So the first of all, the bronze winner in this category of best field yield. Well done, Peter Chapman of Aberdeenshire, sponsored by Lamyman Nickerson, with a grain yield of 9.7 tonnes a hectare. The silver award for best spring barley field yield goes to Thomas Todd in Northumberland, sponsored by Syngenta, with a yield of 10.7 tonnes a hectare. And the overall winner in this category with the gold award for best spring barley yield goes to David Bell in Fife. Well done, David, sponsored by Lamyman Nickerson, with a grain yield of 11.3 tonnes a hectare. Moving on to the best percentage of spring barley potential yield. And the bronze award in this category goes to well done, Duncan Wilson and Angus, sponsored by AHDB, with 74% of 10.4 tonnes per hectare of potential yield. The silver award in this category goes to David Bell in Fife. Well done, David. 83% of 13.7 tonnes a hectare. His entry sponsored by Lamyman Nickerson. And the overall winner in this category, best percentage of spring barley potential yield, goes to well done, Peter Chapman in Aberdeenshire, sponsored by Lamyman Nickerson, 87% of 11.1 tonnes a hectare. So moving on to the oilseeds, Yen. Now, for many, poor establishment and issues with cabbage stem flea beetle have posed a significant challenge, but the award winners managed to battle against these problems and come out top. Now, these are reported as gross output, where yield is corrected for the oil content. So let's start with the bronze award for best field yield, and the winner of the bronze award. Well done, John and Tom Williams in East Yorkshire, sponsored by Lamyman Nickerson, with a gross output of 6.59 tonnes a hectare. Silver award for best field yield in the oilseeds category goes to Mark Stubbs in Lincolnshire. Well done, Mark. Gross output of 6.71 tonnes a hectare. And the overall winner of best field yield in the oilseeds category goes to, oh good heavens, it's Tim Lamyman in Lincolnshire. Gross output of 7.01 tonnes a hectare. Well done, Tim. Moving on to best percentage of potential yield in this category, in the oilseeds category. Bronze award goes to Alan K. Jensen in Denmark, sponsored by Bayer, with 60% of the potential yield. The silver award goes to well done, Mark Stubbs in Lincolnshire, 61% of a potential yield of 11.04 tonnes a hectare. And the winner in this category, best percentage of potential yield in oilseeds. Well, Tim Lamyman of Lincolnshire, 69% of 10.2 tonnes a hectare. Well done, Tim. Now, this category is for the Innovator of the Year. So this is presented to the grower felt to have gone above and beyond in their quest to really discover more about their crops. And this year, the Innovator of the Year award goes to, well done, Chris Eglinton of Norfolk. And for many, who many have had the pleasure of working with recently, it was felt that Chris is always first to get involved in new initiatives and test different ideas. Chris's innovative attitude is not held back by concerns of failure. He really embraces change and progression, and he's keen to share his findings with others. He's a true on-farm innovator and a worthy winner. Well done, Chris. So if I can find it, I'm going to turn my camera back on. I seem to have lost it. Bear with me a second. There we go. Well, in the land of the living. Thank you very much. That's great. So congratulations to all of the winners. But of course, it's not just about the winning here. It's the taking part. You know, so congratulations to everyone who took part in this year's Yen. I mean, the yields have been really, really impressive. And that's, you know, despite the most atrocious growing conditions that we heard about earlier. But what we really want to know is to find out how on earth did Peter Chapman coach that yield from his wheat? And how did David Bell feed his spring barley? And just how can you introduce the momentous magic that is the Lamyman effect into your farm? Well, I'm delighted to say that they very kindly agreed to join us. That three of the winners, Tim, Peter and David, very kindly agreed to join us this evening and share the secrets of their strategies and successes. And this is your chance to put them on the spot, prize some of those winning ways out of them. And the way to do this is to pose a question, and you'll see somewhere on your screen, if you haven't lost it like I have, the question panel. So please get on asking your question, and we're going to have a quick look. While you're posing your questions, we're going to have a quick look through a series of videos they took on their farm a few days ago. So I think that video is going to play now.
Hello and welcome to Upper Magus Farm, albeit virtually in these challenging times. My name's David Bell, and you're watching this because I've been successful with some winter barley and some spring barley this year, which has been a great end to a challenging year for a lot of us. So here at Upper Magus, we're mixed farming with beef, cattle, cereals and potatoes with environmental schemes as well. And with being a conventional mixed farm, moving into reduced tillage, non-inversion, and just starting that transition. 2020 has been a fairly challenging year, but it's been arguably pretty good for two of my fields at least. The winter barley went in the ground a bit later than I'd hoped. The winter was wet, very wet up here, and because it had a decent establishment beforehand, the rooting and the plants survived the water. There was a bit of waterlogging in the field, but fortunately the structure took that water away, and the crop survived and did very well. We got on and drilled the spring barley pretty early in decent conditions prior to the drought. So that early establishment, the good soil tilth that we had for the spring barley, the more delicate crop that it is, obviously paid big dividends. It's an astounding yield, and I think more importantly to me anyway, for producing malting barley, it was low nitrogen. It all went away for malting under 1.6, so it was really impressive to be able to achieve that with the challenging year. And it was farm practice nitrogen application as well, 130 kilos of N, which shows there's quite a lot came from the soil, not just from on top. I've been in yen for in and out, I think 5 years. As much as it's very nice, and I'm very happy to receive these awards, it's about the learning and the sharing of information and the conversations, the chats around what makes a yield. Thank you very much for the three sponsors that have helped me achieve these wonderful awards. So thank you very much.
Hi everybody, Tim Lamyman from Lamyman Farms in the chapel at Worleby. Yield Enhancement Network, or YEN. Devil's in the detail, and this is why we enter YEN every year. That end of season report with the details of how the crop's grown, the nutritional problems it's had, or the good areas you've got in it, and all those extra details from sending in soil samples, tissue tests and the grain analysis you get at the end of the season, all adds up to a key foundation way of improving yields. And it's a core part of the programme we use here to identify areas we can work on. That and root structures and biomass are the key elements of this year's successes. Moving into farm team, Robert, Andy and David, and their attention to details using my no stone unturned approach and timings. Without that team, I certainly couldn't achieve what I'm achieving at the moment. Moving into varieties and crops, oilseed rape, we used LG Acacia, a short, stiff, conventional variety from Lamyman. Fantastic speed for a conventional variety out the ground in the autumn. Unfortunately, with it being early drilled in the 18th of August period, it got up with enough canopy to establish, get away from the flea beetle, even though the flea beetle had a fairly good go at it. Produce a fantastic tap root and structure, and all these key foundations on the tap root and structure came from the Delta program, the cytokine growth we get out of this program. So here's a classic example for you in oilseed rape. Looking at that long tap root, the cytokine growth that we've got from the fibrous root structure around it, that nice evenness in the stem, and that fantastic, I think you can just see here, evenness in the canopy in the oilseed rape. That's what we get out of the Delta program, and it's a core foundation of where we get the yields for biomass out of this farm. Moving into winter barley, KWS Hawkins, didn't even realise there was a category this year, we just thought it was in the wheat category. It did fantastically well, short, stiff variety, bold grain, good 1,000 grain weight, and a fantastic hectolitre weight. It was all contributing factors with head numbers that produce the barley yields. And finally, moving into winter wheat. The collaborative team effort, and there's no one individual that should take credit for this, with the KWS Coliseum and KWS Parking, is what produced the yields on this farm. So right from variety choice through to growth regulation, fungicide program and nutritional program, each one had a key foundation contribution to yield this year. And it's through a collaborative approach of several people in this chapel, through a lot of meetings, that produced the yields that we got from the winter wheat this year. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, welcome to South Red Bog Farm, Strichen in Aberdeenshire. My name is Peter Chapman and I farm here in partnership with my wife Grace, and we have three daughters who are in their mid to late teens and early 20s. We farm 1,050 acres all owned, of which 850 acres is arable, and the remainder is in either temporary or rough grazing, and this supports a herd of 70 suckler cows, and we finish all the progeny on farm. The final part of our business is renewables. We own and operate 4 800 kilowatt wind turbines, and this provides us with a diversified income. Our land is mainly sandy clay loam, and this is split into a strict 5-block rotation. So we grow 2 years of spring barley, followed by winter barley, winter oilseed rape and winter wheat. We are a plough-based system. I'm afraid there's no min-till nonsense here, and I feel that's important to keep on top of any weed burdens that we may have. An important part of our arable business is application of organic manures. So we apply either compost, cattle FYM or chicken muck to every arable acre every year, and have done for the last 30 years. We've been involved with YEN since 2015, so this is our 6th crop. We joined YEN to try and discover the limitations on our farm and to try and maximise the potential of our crops. And I feel YEN has done that, and we are now managing the limitations better, and we have more resilient crops than we used to do. So what worked for us in 2020? I'm afraid there's no magic bullet. It was just down to the weather. The conditions suited our heavier farm, and with all the organic matter that we put into the soils, it's again made our soils pretty resilient when it comes to drought. Lastly, I would just like to thank Bob Bulmer from Hutchison's and Nick Wallace from Lamyman for sponsoring me, and I look forward to your questions later on this evening.
Great, well, thank you very much. That's super. So we're now going to move on to the questions, and we've got some super questions coming through. Thank you very much for those. Keep those questions coming through, and I'm now going to welcome Tim and David and Peter. Thank you very much for those. Well done, first of all, for your cracking achievements, and thank you very much for that insight into your farms. So now of course, as Roger said, it's not just down to luck. I mean, yes, the weather has a huge influence, but farms differ consistently, and varieties, nutrition, and crop protection all have very significant differences. So there's value in both, and importantly, it's about, first of all, understanding the growing conditions, how the winning crops were grown, and how they were grown as well, and also understanding how the winners thought about their winning crops, especially in such a horrible year. So we've got some questions coming through now, and let's have a look. So were the yields that you achieved in yen similar across your whole farm? Tim, would you like to have a go at answering that one?
Definitely not. It was all about early drilling this year, rooting structures, and that's where we got the yields. We had the same disastrous weather everybody else did later season, so the later drilled December and February, March drilled crops weren't anywhere near as good as what we did early season.
Right. David, what were your experiences? Consistent?
Yeah, similar to Tim, early drilled winter cereals did well. Later stuff not so well when we puddled it in, maybe shouldn't have. And then into the spring cropping, again, our winning field was the first field drilled, and yields slipped after that as the drier weather kicked in and dried up the seedbed for the establishment. So yeah, we had some excellent spring barley, but some fairly poor as well.
And what about yourself, Peter?
Well, it seems to be contrary to what happened in the rest of the country, but we've had our best harvest ever. With record yields for spring barley, oilseed rape and wheat. It was really only the winter barley that suffered from the drought in May and ran out of steam, lost tillers, at the crucial time. So our yields were pretty consistent across the board. Didn't have much variation with spring barley. Oilseed rape, every field was almost exactly the same. My yen wheat was exceptionally good, but across the board wheat yields were good. So I apologise for having such a good season when I know everybody else has had an absolute stinker.
No, I don't think there's any reason to apologise there, Peter. Well done. I mean, fantastic. I suppose we're all jealous that we didn't get the same weather that you did, but that's not going to be the same every year, I guess. Anyway, we've now got there's a really cracking question that's come through, and which I'm very much enjoy asking. So we've heard a lot about the farm factor, and I don't know if you're familiar with the term. The farm factor is important. So tell me about your farm factor. What is it about your farm factor that gives you those stonking yields then? David, I'm going to ask this of you first.
I'm going to say the livestock and the rotation. We're a beef suckler herd. We finish everything. We create a lot of FYM. It's incorporated back into the ground. We have a good mix of rotation from potatoes in our rotation, but we also have grass lays, peas as well. So we're adding to it, and we're also importing hen muck as well where we can. as conditions allow. So it's all about feeding the soil. So to start there and then build up, really.
Peter, what about yourself? What's the farm factor? And I'm wondering whether it's something to do more with. I mean, David attributes it to muck. What about how you feel, what your priorities are, and things like that? I don't know whether that has more to do with it.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to have to agree with David as well. I mean, as I said in my short video, we've been applying muck to every arable acre for the last 30 years. So organic matters are all between 7 and 9%. We've built that resilience in there for drought. But also, again, I would echo what he says about rotation. I mean, we've had a strict 5-course rotation for since I've started farming. And I think it's vitally important to have a proper rotation. So, I mean, farm factor, attention to detail. I don't have any staff on my farm. I know every square inch of my farm. I plough it all, drill it all, spray it all, combine it all. So I think attention to detail has a lot to do with it as well.
Attention to detail and muck is what it seems to be coming out. But does that chime with you, Tim?
Yeah, that's part of it. We tend to overhaul everything here, so it's right from rooting structure through to prolonging greening. We try and cover everything. So I think the delta factors probably our advantage here, producing cytokinin growth and root structures. That's a key foundation of yield on here, and prolonging greening, late seeding. So fantastic nutritional programs and fungicides in the Revisols of this world. I couldn't believe how much extra greening, products like that add to here. So as we've heard from Roger, prolonging greening is also a key foundation on this farm, and how to get it, whether it's from root structures, fungicides, or nutrition. We overhaul everything, and that's how we try to push the yields further and further each year.
We've got a specific question. You mentioned the Delta program that you use there, Tim. We've got a specific question from Mark Doval there about the Delta program. Wants you to go into a little bit more detail about it. Could you just tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so we'll start with that from 2 leaves, whether it be wheat, barley, or oilseed rape, using it to naturally produce cytokinin growth into the plant, which is producing a larger root structure, as you saw from the video, with a lot more fibrous root mass and a more compact habitat. So it gives you a fantastic habitat on top of the ground as well as underneath. But the root structures is where we really go for there, and it's an early season program, so you're looking from autumn through to early spring, and it's a key foundation here. The further you can get your roots in, especially as we see from the results this year, we didn't get a lot of water in the spring, even though we had loads in the autumn. That's what I think gave us a big advantage this year.
Great. Well, we've got lots of questions coming through. Thank you very much. Do keep your questions coming. We'll get to as many of them as we can, but we've got 2 questions here looking very similar. So I'm going to sort of combine them, if you like. I mean, all of you got stonking yields. Again, congratulations. I'm incredibly jealous. But could you have done anything to eat just a little bit more out of them? Was there any point where you felt, oh, I could have done a little bit better there? So was there anything in particular you could have done to just get a little bit more out? Peter, I'm going to start with you.
I would say the only thing that we had an issue with was PGR application. Because it was so dry, it was making that decision of whether to go or not. So unfortunately, both my end fields ended up being pretty flat, and I wish I'd taken the jump and just put on the PGRs to keep them standing, which might have helped light interception a bit more. But God, I'm not complaining about the yields I got, but that would really be the only thing that I could say that was maybe slightly wrong.
David, what about yourself?
Yeah, well, as my potential wasn't that high, according to what it could be. Yeah, I mean, part of the Yen entry is we learn about our fields, and so we get soil reports, and we get our crop harvest reports, and it analyses the grain. I entered Yen Nutrition this year as well, which is really does a post-mortem on the grain. But according to my reports, my pH was a little bit off, a little bit low, and my molybdenum was a little bit low. And you know, with these things, I'll maybe focus on them a bit better next year. So yeah, there's always something, and there's thousands of variables, and it's just trying to get them all to line up. So yeah.
Yeah. Tim, what about yourself? I can't believe there's much more you can do. Surely you're doing everything.
Well, as you say, Tom, there's always something, and Yen reports always show something up. We're always struggling with potassium and phosphate on here. Our indices are quite high out of soil, but being very high pH, we have massive lockups, and so the grain report always seems to produce one that you scratch your head and wonder what else you can try and do to increase it. We tried all sorts of things this year, but the grain report seems to show they haven't worked yet.
Right. Well, another question that's come through. We heard earlier on from Roger talking about the biomass. It's all about biomass, getting there. And of course, one of the aspects of biomass and retaining biomass is retaining that green area retention, which is something that you know, there seems to be a lot of focus on these days. What's your view on retaining green area retention? Is it important, and how do you do it? Tim, we'll start with you.
Well, slightly covered that before, but it starts from the rooting structures. So the deeper you can get the roots in the ground, the more water you've got access to. And our reports prove we must have had some fantastic root structures this year for the dry spring we had, even though we had masses of rain in the autumn. And then we look at using products like Tip Top round about T1 timing to get potassium and phosphate into the plant, even if it's not getting into the grain, to increase the width of the stems and push it through. And then prolonged greening at the end of the season. It's probably the best part out of the BioNature program. I love the extra cowflux late application parts of the program, and in the wheat especially, Revysol with the other two products, Exenium and Pyraxystrobin in there, produce fantastic greening on the flag leaf. So a double combination in there definitely gives us prolonged greening. Our only issue at harvest is if we can actually get it ripe enough to combine in the leaves because the head's gone.
Great. Peter, do you want to talk about green leaf retention? What's your view there?
Well, I mean, that was probably the main thing about this season for us was it was such a low disease year. So our wheat maintained its green leaf through the whole season, but we do use a higher rate fungicide program. We're a bit like what Tim said about rooting. I mean, we use phosphate fertilizers down the spout with every crop to try and get a really good root mass there as well. And plus, you cannot beat a good scalp of hen's muck to keep the crop green, but keeping it standing is a problem.
Yeah. Comes back to muck again. David, what's your view here?
Yeah, well, it's the growing crop, and you start at the very bottom of the plant, the roots, and with seed dressings onto that. We've already got our high statuses from years of muck on the ground, but we're doing trace elements as well. We're doing biostimulants, and we're just keeping that crop really clean. The barleys, especially, you know, they've got clean leaf all the time. If disease gets in, it's always potential yield that's being sapped away, potential green area. So it's keeping it clean, keeping it standing. We split and keeping the stress off the plant. So we split our PGRs so they're not all hit at once. So it's a lot softer on the growing crop. A few more passes, but pays dividends.
Great. There's a specific question that's come through for you, Peter. Mark Doble is wondering what your 5-year rotation is.
It's 2 years of spring barley, followed by winter barley, winter oilseed rape, and then winter wheat. But I must say that a proper rotation for Aberdeenshire would be another 3 years of grass in there as well, which I would say is the ultimate. But we don't do that.
Now, there are 1 or 2 comments and questions coming through about the finances here, and this is a question that always comes up, that you know, that you're just throwing the kitchen sink at your crop, you know, and to hell with how much you're spending. So would you just like to give us a bit of an insight here? I mean, one of the questions that came through was asking whether you just throw everything at that last 10%, just to eat that last 10% out. You know, are we talking about profitable crops here? Is this profitable farming, or is it just to get the highest yield? Tim, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, you could accuse me of that, but we use a system of high input, high output. We classify each field where we think it should be in yield, and we attribute the costs to each field. So each field is individually identified, whether it's a 10 tonne a hectare potential, right up to 15, 16 tonne a hectare potential, and we run a budget to match the field yield. So yes, the higher the field yield, the higher inputs we need to put in to create that, and the better yielding fields definitely produce the better gross margins. The lower ones, even though we're putting the inputs on that, some of those can be marginal on my steep short hills at home.
Great. Peter, do you want to talk about the actual sort of gross margin of the crop?
Well, I mean, my highest gross margin field this year was my yen wheat field, which was it was over £1,900 a hectare. But I mean, it doesn't always follow. Actually, just looking at the figures here, I actually spent £40 a hectare less on my spring barley this year than I did last year. But it's just a case of following the season and targeting what's required for that season. Doesn't always follow that you need to spend maximum. I mean, we are a high input, high output business, there's no doubt about it. But one thing again has helped us do is to target the areas that we need to look at to get over the limitations on our farm.
Great. Briefly, David, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, I mean, my highest margin cereal crop anyway was my Bordeaux winter barley from Sonova, and you know, it's an astounding margin because it's an astounding yield. And the same with my spring barley is only about £100 off margin, that margin, and it's because we've seen the potential of the crop and fed that potential, whether it be with protection, with plant protection products to keep them healthy, or with foliar feeds or biostimulants, you know, or just trying to keep birds away from the stuff. But not all fields get the same because they don't have the same potential. So it's knowing your ground and having experience to go over those yields. But with these higher yields we get, although they are higher inputs, the cost per ton, where it comes down to, because we've got that larger yield, it's so much diluted. So yeah, but
great.
It's about margin, not about yield.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. We could go on all evening. It's been a fascinating time, and thank you, all three of you, very much for your very candid and open replies. And thank you very much to Yen and to ADAS. I've certainly enjoyed myself. It's been fantastic to see all these worthy winners. So I'm going to hand back to, I think, am I handing over to Daniel? Or am I handing back to Teresa?
Thank you, Tom. Many congratulations to you all, and to all of those that are out there as well. I think a virtual round of applause. I think you've got a job on Eurovision coming up there, Tom. Very well presented, and many well done to you all. Absolutely fascinating stories from you all that we'll reflect on a lot. So thank you very much. So without further ado, we're going to hand over to Daniel Kindred, Head of Agronomics, who's going to talk us through some of the areas that you can get involved in and some of the latest updates to share from Yen. Over to you, Daniel. And I think you need to unmute yourself, Daniel, please. No, not yet. The powers of technology. Look, Daniel's a massive fan of technology, just need to make it work. Try again. No, not quite there yet. While I let you do that, I've just some of my conclusions from Tim and David and Peter's kind of conversation was that importance of keeping biomass through the season, that kind of feeding to potential and building that potential right from the start, and Tim's focus on rooting, that attention to detail that you might not oh, you're back, Daniel.
You can hear me now. Sorry about that. Okay, great. So I just wanted to talk to you about the about where we're going in the future with the yen, how we see this as really taking things forward, and how we can get involved. So I got control of that. So I think really the real power of the yen and where it's really important as we see this is the yen, is what the yen represents. What Roger talked about here with this, the yen is, we started with yield, but actually it's the approach here that we can apply to anything of working together with farmers, with researchers, with industry, with policy, with advisors around a shared understanding, shared concepts around whatever the question might be, whether that could be soil health, or it could be biodiversity, or it could be carbon emissions, or it could be nutrition. But this approach that we have of having a shared understanding that drives the metrics and the data that we should be measuring, and then being able to compare that, and that benchmarking part of that, being able to see how you compare to your peers, being a real reason to engage, but also then providing the data that allows us that we can analyse and then drive the insight from that and work out the ideas, the designs, the hypotheses that we could be that might be driving the target that we're looking at. And then as a community of farmers together, being able to test those ideas in a coordinated way with some robust statistics, robust lines, doing that at scale that we can do together. And so to us, that approach is really what I think the yen represents, and where the real power is going forwards. So we started the yen with cereals in 2012. Since we've added spring cereals, spring barley, the oilseed rape, peas and beans, grass, potatoes, and then this last year, yen nutrition, which Roger talked about. Up until this point, everything was really been very deep and narrow. You got getting information, lots of very detailed information, but only on a really single field. Going forwards, I think there's real power for being able to do this across many more fields and on a much greater scale. And that's what we started to do with yen nutrition, where we've recognised from the yen that your grain, analysing grain at harvest can be a really good diagnosis of how your of your nutrient management. But doing that, but just the number itself doesn't necessarily tell you so much. Putting that together again in a benchmarking perspective, where you can see how you compare with your peers, with all the other information, explanatory information about your soil type and your what you've applied, your soil indices, all coming together. But really, with the yen, to support all of these yens, we need better digital infrastructure. We need to be able to working better. This is common stuff that we need to be able to exchange data and be able to view that data as a community in a better way. And we've been trying to get that for the last 8 years with very limited success. So I'm really pleased that in the last month we've just been successful with some Innovate funding to help actually provide this digital infrastructure that we can build over the next 6 months to help support this data exchange. So getting away just from kind of exchanging Excel spreadsheets to be able to doing this properly online with a database. And really crucially, I think Roger mentioned this, provide what we call dynamic benchmarking. So instead of these 24-page reports that you get back with PDFs of that's all of just static, what we really want to be able to open up is for you to be able to compare see how your field compares to whoever you want to compare yourself to. So people on the same soil type, or people within a 50-mile radius, or on a certain variety, or whatever it might be. I think that if we could make that work, then we can really open up the way that we can work as a community here and drive the scalability of this. so that we can then access much more data, share much more data together, and learn together much faster. And crucially, also they're doing that across a wider range of networks. So this funding as well is also is helping us support what we're calling yen zero. So starting to better look at this in terms of greenhouse gas intensities, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions of our crops. Because you won't have missed the talk about net zero over the last months and years. Everybody knows that agriculture is committed to and needs to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, but there's also a real opportunity there for farmers in terms of carbon sequestration and being part of the solution. So there's this really large and growing interest in the industry in net zero, but we need to come together with a shared understanding and some common metrics about this, so we can talk the same language and not talk past each other. We need to better identify and evaluate what works with real confidence. And there are real considerable uncertainties in here. There's lots of things we don't necessarily know. But there is good scope to quantify and reduce crop greenhouse gas intensities. We can calculate those, and that's a reasonably simple place to start. And we've already got the data in the ends to run those calculations and allow that benchmarking. So we're proposing to build this as a network to share ideas and experience and data around the greenhouse gas costs of cropping as a community and progressing that together. So we'll be launching that in the next 6 months in 2020. Exactly what that looks like, what the shape of it is what we're still working out. So if there's something that you're really interested in and would like to get involved in helping us to shape that, then please do get in touch. And that's really been made possible by another bit of funding that we had earlier this year from the Morley Agricultural Foundation, really addressing this question that of the relationship between yield and environmental performance, because there's this perception out there that high yields are somehow bad in terms of the environment, whereas what we tend to see is that actually high yields are there isn't, as was mentioned, there isn't a really strong relationship, certainly in the end data set, between the yields achieved and the inputs that are put on. And so in terms of reducing improving environmental performance per tonne, then higher yields are a big win. And so that funding has enabled us to run the calculations of greenhouse gas intensities on all of the end data over the last 8 years, where we've got enough data to be able to do it. So each one of these individual bars is a greenhouse gas intensity from an individual crop from the yen over the last 8 years, and the gold symbols at the top are the yields that are achieved. See, the brown at the bottom is the greenhouse gas costs from operations, and then there's some really tiny bars which are seed and ag chems. The blue bar here is nitrogen fertilizer, so the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizer, which you can see is a very large part of the emission in many of these crops. But then also the soil nitrous oxide emissions, so emissions of nitrous oxide from the soil. So you can see together, soil nitrous oxide and nitrogen fertilizer are really kind of the dominant parts of our greenhouse gas intensities. But you can see that there is this there's large variation here. So some crops are below 200 kilos of CO2 per tonne. Others are much more, over 400. And it tends to be the highest yielding crops, or that are giving us the lowest intensities here. So this gives us a really good basis for benchmarking greenhouse gases going forward to use in zero, and also to understand and analyse and make progress on what works here. How do we get to these lower intensity crops? So another thing is just to mention oilseed yen. So Sarah Kendall has and colleagues are launching this year with a focus on establishment. So we all know that just getting a crop established of oilseed rape and getting an oilseed rape crop to harvest is a challenge in itself. So that and the importance of establishment here, and especially with the dreaded flea beetle. So we've introduced an establishment beauty contest to the oilseed network this year with drilling date categories and trying to get more information around the establishment period with some funding from AHDB. And there's still time to get involved in that. Look at the website to do that. And you can find out more information about all of the networks on the Yen website, yen.adas.co.uk. You can also sign up there for the technical meetings we'll be holding in December, where we can go through the results of the Yen 2020 in much more detail. That's open to anybody who's entered the Yen in 2020, but also anybody who signs up for the Yen for 2021. So sign up now for your 2021 crop, and you can still join us in these technical meetings in December. So to summarise, the Yen has grown to thousands of farms, but we still think there's potential to grow much, much further. Both in its current deep form of the Yen, of the specific Yen, crop Yens as we have them, but also in a much simpler and broader format, like in Yen Nutrition and with Yen Zero. And also the model for innovation networks that tackling out other issues that might be completely separate to yield. And this will be supported by these digital developments that we've got with this Innovate project, which we're really pleased about. But to make progress with this, your feedback is really, really important to continue the improvement. And so we'll be reaching out to kind of help get you to help us develop these things in the right direction. We're really pleased as well that since January, February this year, we've had a full-time Yen manager, Deval Patel, who will help you through the whole process. You can email Deval at yen@adas.co.uk to help register the crops. So it's really great to have that. And again, if you want to get in touch with Yen Zero, then please do. So lastly, just to thank everybody. There's an awful lot of work that goes into producing the reports that have gone out to everybody in the last few days. So from the ADAS team. But the ADAS team also really wants to thank you and everybody who's entered the Yen, because without the data that you provide and all the effort that goes into all of the effort that goes into producing the data and getting that back to us, and it's not an easy job that everyone does. We wouldn't have anything without that. So thank you to all the farmers and everybody who's involved and all the supporters. And crucially, thank you also to all the sponsors, because without the sponsors that we have for the Yen, we wouldn't have been able to do any of it. So thank you very much. Thank you. So back to Teresa.
Fantastic, Daniel. Thank you so much. Really interesting to hear about the new developments that's going on. Congratulations for winning the Innovate funding, and I can really see Yen going to a much higher level, being driven by all of you and the team. So well done. Thank you for pulling it all together, and great to share that. Excited to see what Yen Zero, Yen Nutrition, and the different sectors take going forward. So what an amazing evening we've had. Thank you to everybody for participating, for you to watching along at home. It's great to see Ben having his dinner, Charlotte watching with the family, David sharing a beer, supporting the barley industry at the same time. Thank you for taking part. So just a few points before we close. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Katie, Elise, and just build it all, that would be great. So there's a few more events coming up with Yen over the next couple of weeks. So the 7th, the 8th and the 10th of December are more technical seminars going into the detail on the cereal Yen and the oilseed Yen, having a look through the reports in more detail, learning more about the lessons from Harvest 2020. And so Yen 2020 and 2021 participants can book onto that. Also on the 10th of December, there's a session specific looking at how Yen can work for you. Following on from that, we normally have the Milling Week conference at the end of February, and we've changed that this year into a series of webinars running through the same week, one looking at technical insights and learning from Milling Wheat growers, one looking at the supply chain, and announcing the winners of the Yen Wheat Quality Awards for those growing milling wheat. So they're all up on the AHDB events website, and you can book onto them there. The next slide, Katie, please. Also, knowledge exchange, that's something that we're all passionate about, and sharing and discussing all of these goes on next week. AHDB are running its agronomy week, replacing the agronomist conference and the agronomy events we'd have around the country. It's one login to attend all of these. The Cereals and Oilseeds Day is on the Monday and Tuesday. The Potatoes Day is on the Wednesday. Again, if you Google AHDB Agronomy Week, you'll find all this information and you can book on to join them. Sarah Kendall will be here talking about oilseed rape and the results of the analysis of the oilseed yen entries for the last few years with me on Monday. Next slide, Katie, please. So finally, it's just to say, as you leave here, you'll have a survey that will come through to you in about an hour. This is the first time we've done this in this kind of format, evidently this year. It's been fantastic to bring it to you, to see the engagement, to have you there, but we'd be really pleased to know how you thought it and whether it might be something interesting to do in a future session as well. As always, if you've got any questions, please do come back either straight to Deval, straight to the ADAS Yen team, or through the Crop Tech Show, the Yen Hub and the ADAS stand. The last slide, Katie, please. So I think it all only leaves me to say a huge thank you. A thank you to the sponsors that are on the screen that have been thanked many times today, because they do play a large part in the enthusiasm for bringing it together and for sharing the learnings. To our fantastic team today, to Tom, I do think a place for Eurovision is there for you, for your passion and enthusiasm for chairing what has been a fantastic session with our winners. To Dave, to Tim, to Peter, for giving up your time and for sharing the intricacies of how you approach your Yen Awards. Like we say, fascinating insights and some definite themes there that we can all take home, looking at our potential, doing that analysis, building that biomass and keeping that green through the year. And we can only aspire to achieve the green crops, as Roger always tells us, up in Lincolnshire with you, Tim. A huge thank you goes to the ADAS team behind the scenes, to Jane and to Katie, to Christina, to Sarah, who've been working hard behind the scenes today. And a massive thank you to Roger, to Daniel, to Sarah and Deval for your vision for what Yen was intended to achieve and still is moving forwards. Without you, I think we'd be in a different place with where we are now on our yield. So a huge thanks to you, to the whole RSK and ADAS team. And finally, a big thank you to all for watching. Keep challenging yourselves, keep sharing what you're finding and excelling in what you do. We look forward to seeing you at the Yen Awards next year. Perhaps you'll be on this podium. Make sure you read that report. Take care.